receive motions for the chair.
I nominate Mr. McKinnon.
It has been moved by Mrs. Rempel-Garner that Mr. McKinnon be elected as chair of the committee. Y a-t-il d'autres motions?
Any other motion?
Okay, so I declare the motion carried and Mr. McKinnon duly elected chair of the committee.
Thank you all. I shall move to the head of the table now. And I will ask if it's okay with the committee, if the clerk can carry on with the election of the vice chairs. Seeing no dissent. Mr. Clerk, will you please go ahead with the election of the vice chairs?
Pursuant to Standing Order 106.2, the first vice chair must be a member of the official opposition. I am now prepared to receive motions for the first vice chair. Any motion?
I nominate Michelle Rempel-Garner.
It has been moved by Mr. Davies that Mrs. Rempel-Garner be elected as the first vice chair of the committee. Y a-t-il d'autres motions?
Any other motions? On
Chair, yes. I declare the motion carried and Mrs. Rempel-Garner elected as first vice chair. So we'll move for the second. Conformément à l'article 106.2, le second vice.
Pursuant to section 106.2, the second vice chair must be a member of an opposition party other than the official opposition. I'm now prepared to receive motions for the second vice chair. I want to appoint Luc Thériault for the position of second vice chair of the committee. So it is moved by Mr. Palowski that Mr. Luc Thériault be elected second vice chair of the committee. Are there any further motions? The motion is carried. Mr. Thériault has been appointed the second vice chair of the committee. Mr. Chair?
But ask people who wish to speak or be recognized at any point, use the raise hands function on the participants panel. I see Mr. Van Bynen, your hand is raised. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Still being relatively new at this, is this the appropriate time for me to introduce a motion for a study? I intend to bring forward a motion on the impacts of COVID-19 on the mental health and the well-being of Canadians. I would like to go forward with that.
Thank you, Mr. Van Bynen. Now is not actually the appropriate time. We have to undertake the routine motions that actually build a structure around the committee. I will give you first dibs once that's completed to move or to discuss your motion. Next on the list, we have Mr. Kellaway. Mr. Kellaway, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and hello to our new colleagues and colleagues from the last session. I'd like to move to readopt all routine motions from the previous session.
Thank you, Mr. Kellaway. I'm going to suggest that we go through them one at a time, so that we're clear as to what the motions are and what exactly we're doing. May I get you to move them one by one, please?
Sure.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Ms. Rempel-Garner.
Since you've started a speaking list on Mr. Van Bynen's item, I would like to be first in line to respond.
I'm sorry, you'd like to be first in line to respond to Mr. Van Bynen's motion?
Correct.
Correct. Of course, certainly.
Mr. Chair, I have a point of order as well.
Yes, go ahead.
It's just more of a suggestion. I'm just wondering if we can get unanimous consent of everybody in the committee to adopt the routine motions as a whole. They were distributed to people, and if people don't have any objection to them, maybe you can test the committee. We can just adopt them all at once and save time.
Is it the will of the committee to proceed this way?
Yes.
Do we have any dissent? I think I recognize the will of the committee, and I think that's appropriate in this case that we do that. I would caution, though. I think on an ongoing basis, we should make sure we do motions one at a time. I think there's less confusion. But I think with routine motions, I think we'll be fine. So once again, if I just test the will of the committee, is it okay if we pass all the routine motions in one fell swoop? Any dissent?
Mr. Chair, are you talking about every motion in the routine motions pass as we passed back prior to virtual Parliament?
That is correct. That is what the Mr. Davies suggestion is. Okay.
If there's only one concern that I have is I remember when we were doing these things, there would be hiccups with technology. There would be 10 minutes with some of our witnesses, and then we would always go over. And oftentimes there would be, well, I shouldn't say oftentimes, but quite often there would be times when a member who was speaking near the end perhaps wouldn't get a chance to speak. So I don't know if that's a concern of other members of the committee, but I think it's important that everybody and all parties do get a chance to speak.
So there is a motion. One of the routine motions is that witness be given 10 minutes for their opening statement. I think if we're going to modify that, we should deal with that separately.
I personally, Mr. Chair, I'm okay if you use chair management on that, but again, making sure that all the members are okay with that.
All right. So the suggestion is that we adopt the routine motions from the previous session as is, except that for the motion that the witnesses be given 10 minutes for their opening statement, that at the discretion of the chair during the questions of the witnesses, they'll be allocated, that the witness statements be shortened. Do you have a suggestion to what
Actually,
minutes?
I would say keep it the way it is, just again, if all the members on the committee are okay with the chair operating, using their discretion to ensure that all the members get a chance to ask all the questions that they want to ask.
On this point, Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
My understanding is that now that all committees are going to be meeting virtually, that the likelihood that committees can extend past their original slots is not likely to be a possibility, which would preclude members of the opposition from asking questions depending on the speaking orders. So it would be the preference of the Conservative Party that witness statements be held to 5 minutes to allow for time for technical difficulties. And I believe that the PROC recommendation was that witnesses submit their written statements to members ahead of time. I'd look to some of my colleagues for thoughts on that, but I don't actually think it's technically possible for the meetings to go over and get everybody to speak. And I'd hate to see us in a situation where members don't get their speaking slots because we've allowed witnesses, especially department officials, 10 minutes when they could have submitted statements ahead of time.
I think that's an excellent suggestion, Mr. Chair.
So the suggestion I'm hearing is that we adopt the routine motions as is, except that witness statements be witnesses be giving not 10 minutes as previously, but 5 minutes for their opening statements, and all else remaining the same. Are we in agreement on that?
Mr. Chair, I have a comment on that. It's not a hill that I would die on, but I mean, Michelle makes a good point. But my only concern is that we're adopting routine motions for this entire session. We may or may not be operating under virtual guidelines for the entire session. So the real question is I think that we have to ask is 5 minutes sufficient for a witness? in the times when we had people come to Ottawa, or when we're inviting, experts and people who are very busy to come to committee, quite honestly, 5 minutes is not very long, I don't think, for someone to be able to make a meaningful contribution to the committee. I don't know how much time we gain. If we, generally we have 2 witnesses per hour, so you're talking about gaining 10 minutes. I think so. I'm if it's the will of the committee to reduce to 5 minutes, so be it. But I think we've all spoken in the House, and it's very difficult to express a well-developed position or to give information. If we're asking people to come to committee, to say we listen for 5 minutes, I think is too short. That's my sense of it, and I don't think we gain too much as a result of that. But that's just my 2 cents.
Okay, let's do this. Let us propose to adopt all of the all of the routine motions except for the one regarding opening remarks and questioning of witnesses. Adopt all of them in one block, and then we can deal with this and amend it appropriate as a second step. Would it be acceptable to proceed in this way?
I still think we could use good chair management, and we could get through this and make sure that everyone gets a chance to speak. If we had 4 witnesses, perhaps the chair says you get 5 or 6 minutes, and if there's 2 witnesses, maybe that way we get what Ms. Rempel-Garner has suggested, but we also cover what Mr. Davies has suggested.
Let's get all of the other motions sorted out. There doesn't seem to be any disagreement on the other motions or any discussion. So let's pass all the other motions, and then we'll deal with this particular motion separately. Don, go ahead.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. I don't want to, get bogged down in too much minutiae, but quite honestly, I think you misinterpreted what Mr. Fisher was saying. I mean, what Darren was talking about was giving you discretion, I think, to extend the meeting so that we could get all the questions in, and you've interpreted that to mean a limitation on the speaker's time. Now, I'm misunderstanding that, but the thing is, if you start changing one part of the routine motion to limit to 5 minutes, it could affect other things as well. But one thing I was going to suggest that maybe can solve this is to do as you say, adopt all the routine motions except the one on the witness length of time, and just amend that to be up to 10 minutes. And then I think that sort of meets what Mr. Fisher was talking about. And then I still think we still, and I don't think this is a routine motion issue. I think it's more a question of practice that, if we are allowed to extend the meetings and we have that time, that as we did last session, we can continue the meeting past the 2 hours, and in order to get more questions in, if that's technically feasible. And as Michelle said, maybe it's not, but in the event that it is, then we always have the ability as a committee to agree to extend the meeting to get that last couple questioners in, to give everybody a chance to ask the questions that they want.
Okay, so I'm seeing that you're in favor of dealing with this particular motion separately and passing all the other routine motions in one fell swoop. So again, I ask, is that the will of the committee? Is there any dissent? Seeing none, I declare that all of the routine motions, except for the one regarding opening remarks and questioning of witnesses, is passed. I'd like to welcome our analysts to the meeting as well, formally, because now they get brought into the picture. And so now let us carry on with the final routine motion, which is the matter of time for opening remarks and questioning of witnesses. So the motion as it existed previously was that witnesses be given 10 minutes for their opening statement, that at the discretion of the chair during the questioning of witnesses, there will be allocated 6 minutes for the first questioner of each party as follows. So round 1, Conservative Party, Liberal Party, Bloc Québécois, New Democratic Party. For the second and subsequent rounds, the order and time for questioning be as follows. Conservative Party, 5 minutes, Liberal Party, 5 minutes, Conservative Party, 5 minutes, Liberal Party 5 minutes, Bloc Québécois 2.5 minutes, New Democratic Party 2.5 minutes. Would somebody like to move that motion?
Well, Mr. Chair, I liked both what Ms. Rempel-Garner said and what Mr. Davies said, and I think Mr. Davies' suggestion that you just make it up to 10 minutes for the opening statement, I think gets us to where all the members would feel comfortable, but that's how I saw the situation.
Let's move the motion, and then we can entertain amendments to it. Mr. Kellaway, you were moving routine motions. Would you like to move that motion as it stands?
I will move that motion as it stands, yes.
Okay, so that is the motion on the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Can I chime in on this?
Go ahead, please.
My experience in industry committee before, we actually had a couple of meetings canceled because of technical difficulties with witnesses. So my preference would be, and I'm not sure if we can write this into the routine motions, but that there's a requirement that any scheduled witnesses connect with IT well in advance the day before, if possible, on the computer and headset that they are going to be using in the room that they're using. So that these issues don't occur. That's really where a lot of the friction came from, was that witnesses just hadn't done that. So that would be my preference, is that become a requirement. And then the second thing that I would just say is that if you're having technical difficulties with a witness and the technical difficulties go longer than their required statement, that we move directly into the questions of that witness if possible, and if it makes sense. What I don't like to see happen, and it happened several times to me in the previous committee that I vice chaired, was that technical difficulties with witnesses precluded a meeting from happening. And I'm not sure if it's as much of a function of the chair as it was of just witnesses not being tested by IT ahead of time. Sorry, Joshua. But I really do think that's the core of the issue here.
So I think that's really a separate motion on how to deal with those kind of technical issues. The motion before us right now, which I'm looking for amendments for, is about the the time they have for opening statement and so forth. So I see Mr. Davies has raised his hand. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'm happy to sort of to speak this and just say I think the motion needs an amendment that says that witnesses be given up to 10 minutes. But I noticed something else that I think needs to be addressed. It goes on to say that at the discretion of the chair during the questioning of witnesses, there be allocated 6 minutes for the first questioner. The discretion that I would like to see you given is over the witnesses 10 minutes, not over the 6 minutes that is given to the speakers. And so, and I don't think that's the intention of these routine motions, to be able to have you determine whether the Conservative Party, Liberal Party, Bloc, and New Democrats get 6 minutes in our first round. So I think there might be a punctuation error. So I think it should say that witnesses be given up to 10 minutes for their opening statement at the discretion of the chair, semicolon. And then it should say, during the questioning of witnesses, there be allocated 6 minutes for the first question of each party as follows. And you'll notice that in the second round, there is no discretion, which, by the way, is where you actually do exercise discretion occasionally, where it just says the order be as follows. And we know that in the second round, you sometimes have to reduce proportionately our questioning time, which is fine. I don't even think we have to say discretion, because we've always just, you've asked for permission and we always give it to you. But I think we should straighten out that problem in the first round, because it's certainly, the 6 minutes is certainly not at your discretion. The 6 minutes should be set down that that's what it is for each of the parties.
So is that amendment? Are you making that amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I will make that amendment.
So the amendment is that we, actually, could you clarify that amendment, please?
Sure. So it says now that witnesses be given, I propose we meant to say, insert the words up to in front of 10. minutes for their opening statement, and then you remove the semicolon and remove the word that and the comma, and the sentence continues at the discretion of the chair, semicolon. And it continues, yes, and then it just continues during the question witnesses, there'd be allocated 6 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to speak up for the discretion of the chair here. Perhaps we should have an amendment. Well, we'll deal with that separately. So we have an amendment on the floor. Is there anyone who wishes to speak to that particular amendment? Mr. Pawlowski, or Dr. Pawlowski, go ahead.
Yeah, you can just call me Mr. Pawlowski. I support Don's amendment. It seems like a good idea. I like the fact that we leave open the possibility that people can speak for 10 minutes, because some of the issues we're going to be facing require some explanation, like testing and to really figure out like the value of testing, the positive, negative, predictive value, those kind of things. It's pretty hard in 5 minutes to explain that to people who aren't familiar with it, whereas 10 minutes, I think, would probably be enough time. So I think there's a number of issues we'll be looking at that really, in order to understand them, it takes more than 5 minutes. So I think this kind of allows enough flexibility in it, and also address the possibility that we're not, and try to avoid cutting off people because we don't have enough time. So I support Mr. Davies' amendment.
I believe Mr. Kellaway has a point.
Yeah, just a quick comment in terms of Don's approach here. It's a good catch. I like the addition of up to 10 minutes. And of course, the discretion is in the second round, not in the first round. So great catch there, and I think it's a good move.
Okay, thank you. Is there any further discussion on this amendment? So we have people on. So we have people raising their hands physically on the screen. We also have people raising their hand on the participants panel. I'm not sure which of the ones on the participants panel are relating to Mr. Bynen's motion after we're done with routine motions. So for the moment, to just let everybody wave to me on the screen if you wish to make a comment on this particular amendment. Mr. McGuire, please go ahead. Mr. McGuire, you're muted.
Yeah, thanks. No, I only was just going to go back to what was said earlier about the technical difficulty. This is certainly a different situation than we've been faced in with the virtual meetings. Rather, I agree with the 10 minutes if you're sitting in the house all the time, or if we're all together in a committee room, but we're not. And I think the instruction that we received was that there would have to be cooperation with any witness to be able to provide written statements well ahead of time. And I think if that's the case, then we needn't, it's certainly 5 or 6 minutes might be enough for us to understand what the witness is saying, even though regularly it would take them 10, but we don't always get copies ahead of time, and we're supposed to, but in this particular direction, I thought that's where we were at. So I expected that we would all have it, even if we are virtual, we would all receive it by email or text here prior to any witness coming forward. So therefore, we'd have a real good understanding. And I guess to the point there too, particularly with members of departments. That's all I wanted to add. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Is there any further discussion on this amendment? Mr. Van Bynen, you're muted.
Oh, just a sec. I'm sorry, but I think I saw Ms. Adu was raising her hand, but so I just wanted to alert you to that.
Thank you. Ms. Adu, did you have a point? You're muted.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with Don's suggestion, but I think it's necessary to ensure everyone has to ask question in second round. It's more important.
Okay, thank you. Is there any further discussion on this amendment? So, Mr. Davies, you have your hand up on the panel, as well as does Ms. Rempel. Are these points on this motion, on this amendment?
No, but what I would just conclude is that in answer to Larry's concern, I think that's why if we give you the discretion up to 10 minutes, then you can sort of, you know, as Marcus pointed out, if we have a professor from Harvard who's going to be talking about, you know, some complex issue, you know, that's obviously something that they may need 10 minutes on. A different witness, you know, may have fewer points to make and more straightforward, and you can, I think, use your discretion. And I think the other thing is, you know, when we talk to witnesses, we can maybe communicate to them that that's a hard 10 minutes, and if they send their submission in advance, we would appreciate them, we'll read them, we'd appreciate them sort of, you know, taking as little of the 10 minutes as they possibly can to allow more time for questions. So I think we can sort of achieve what all of us are saying here by the amendment. So
okay, so is there any further discussion on this amendment? Seeing none, I'll ask if the committee has unanimous consent to adopt the amendment. Is there any dissent? Declare the amendment adopted. So we now go to the motion, the main motion, which has been amended. Is there any discussion on the motion as amended? Seeing none, I'll ask for if the committee is in agreement with this motion. Is there any dissent? Please raise your hand, or please indicate. Seeing none, I declare that this routine motion is adopted. Now, Ms. Rempel, you had Rempel Garner, you had comments about the process, such as you know, requesting written copies in advance and so on and so forth. If you wish to go ahead with that, I think that would be a routine motion. And I should point out that, of course, when we certainly ask for written statements from the witnesses, sometimes they don't give them to us in time for them to be translated and distributed and so forth. So I guess I would ask if you have a motion there that you would like to put forward around technical issues and so forth.
I would just say, Chair, you know, just for the record, if you can encourage IT services to be testing witnesses where possible ahead of time, as well as requesting written statements, and that just becomes a practice, so that I don't have to raise it as points of order if we have a meeting that is shut down due to technical difficulties.
Well, I certainly, we will certainly do so. We will get our clerk to really request that when we invite witnesses, that they get their statements in. I think we need 72 hours in advance, ideally, to get them translated. And so we can certainly make that request, absolutely. Seeing no other discussion on the routine motions, Mr. Van Bynen, as promised, I said that you would have first shot on substantive motions following the routine motions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, tomorrow, Saturday, October the 10th, is World Mental Health Day. And the motion that I'm proposing is to study the impacts of COVID-19 on mental health and the well-being of Canadians. Over 9,500 Canadians have tragically died due to COVID-19, and every day we're seeing case numbers rise as Canada enters into a second wave. And in the spring, we heard from many witnesses who spoke about the physical impacts of COVID-19 and what we need to do to protect ourselves from the virus. I believe we had 34 meetings. We had 171 witnesses and 51 briefs. But for the exception of one meeting, we didn't hear about the real psychological impacts that we know are happening. Many Canadians are struggling, and in April, the CMHA put out a statement that said Canada must now act to prevent an echo pandemic for mental illness due to COVID-19. And a pandemic, unfortunately, Mr. Chair, that we have no vaccines for. My concern is in terms of what we see as a brewing issue that we should address and make sure that we have the effectiveness and the efficiencies in the programs to go forward to deal with that before it gets out of hand. So my motion, Mr. Chair, is that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study of no less than 8 meetings in order to understand the impacts, including gendered impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on mental health and the well-being of Canadians. B, that we analyze the impacts on Indigenous peoples, racialized Canadians, and vulnerable populations in an effort to identify and address support gaps. That we study the availability of mental health promotion programs and supports for those experiencing the new pandemic-related stress and anxiety, and how those supports have been affected since the pandemic began. That we study the effectiveness and the availability of the virtual mental health services, that we analyze how the Government of Canada can assist provinces and territories in alleviating potential new demands on their healthcare systems resulting from the increase in depression, psychological distress, substance abuse, PTSD, and domestic violence. And that the committee report its findings and recommendations to the House no later than December 7th, 2020, and that pursuant to Standing Order number 109, the committee request the government table a comprehensive report.
Thank you, Mr. Van Bynen.
Sure.
Ms. Rempel, please go ahead. Actually, before you do so, let me interject here. So this is an important motion, and Ms. Rempel, I'm absolutely going to give you an opportunity to respond to it. But I'm suggesting that perhaps the number of studies that we have already considered, the number of, the COVID study that we were doing prior to prorogation and so forth, we might want to have a separate business meeting to deal with all of these issues and to prioritize them. And so I'll ask you all to consider whether you're interested in doing that. And having said that, I will pass the floor over to Ms. Rempel, Ms. Rempel-Garner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I really do find a lot of encouragement in the spirit of this motion that's on the floor. I try not to put my personal life into the public domain, but as somebody who is separated from her family due to COVID-19 measures, I understand the impact of mental health on some of these measures. And, talking to other people who are in similar situations to me, I know that's tough. And that's just one group of people. There are people who have lost their jobs, who are experiencing domestic violence, mental health breakdowns. It's certainly something that I think is important for our committee to look at. That said, our committee has been prorogued for some time due to the government's decision to prorogue Parliament. And in the meantime, today we're seeing record numbers of cases in Ontario, as well as shutdowns of businesses again. And I think that this particular issue needs to be looked at in light of the evidence that was considered in the previous session of this Parliament, but also in light of what's happened over the last couple of months. We need to have answers on the rapid testing procurement process, vaccine status, the decision to shut down the early warning system. There's several issues that this committee needs to look at, and mental health is certainly one of them, but I think it needs to be done in a more holistic way. So I certainly support this particular motion, but it needs to be done in the context of a larger motion and in the larger picture. The other thing I would say, Chair, with your comment to reschedule this for a separate business meeting, I don't agree with that. We've lost nearly 2 months of this committee, and we're in the middle of I wouldn't call it a second wave. This is a tsunami, and there are things that this committee has to look at with regard to its role in scrutinizing the government's response. So I know that there is a desire among certain committee members to look at perhaps a more holistic motion. And with that, I do move to adjourn debate on this motion.
So we have a motion to adjourn the debate. I believe that is non-debatable. So I'll ask the clerk to conduct the vote.
Mr. Barlow,
I support the motion.
Mr. D'Entremont,
I support the motion.
Mr. McGuire,
I support the motion.
Ms. Rempel Garner,
I support the motion.
Monsieur Thériault,
Je suis pour.
Mr. Davies,
Yes.
Mr. Fisher,
No, thanks.
Mr. Calloway,
No.
Mr. Pawlowski,
No.
Ms. Sidhu,
No.
Mr. Van Bynen.
No.
So 6 yeas, 5 nays.
Thank you,
Chair,
Chair.
I have
Chair.
a point of order.
Mr. Davies, go ahead.
Just for future conduct of the committee, that was an unusual voting order. I generally the votes always begin with the government side and then go through the official opposition and Bloc and us. And I just found that unusual to start voting in that order. So it's just something I think we should straighten out for future votes.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. I believe that
Sure.
the voting order is at the discretion of the clerk, but if the clerk wishes to speak to this, we can certainly consider this as something to take up later on.
I would adjust if the will of the committee. I don't mind, honestly. Sorry about that.
Chair.
Ms. Garner?
Thank you,
Rempel
Mr.
Garner?
Chair. Mr. Chair, pursuant to Standing Order 1082, I move that the Standing Committee on Health commence a study on the emergency situation facing Canadians in light of the second wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that this study evaluate, review, and examine all issues relevant to this situation, including the following. A, rapid and at-home testing approvals and procurement process and schedule, and protocol for distribution. B, vaccine development and approvals process, procurement schedules, and protocol for distribution. C, federal public health guidelines and the data being used to inform them for greater clarity on efficacy. D, current long-term care facility COVID-19 protocols as it pertains solely to federal jurisdiction. E, the availability of therapeutics and treatment devices for Canadians diagnosed with COVID-19. F, the Early Warning System Global Public Health Information Network, or GIFIN. G, the government's progress in evaluating pre or post-arrival testing for travelers. H, the availability of paid sick leave for those in quarantine and voluntary isolation. J, the adequacy of health transfer payments to the provinces in light of the COVID-19 crisis. K, the impact of the government's use of World Health Organization advice in early 2020, decision to delay the closure of borders and delay in the recommendation of wearing masks on the spread of COVID-19 in Canada. L, the Public Health Agency of Canada's communication strategy regarding COVID-19. M, the development, efficacy, and use of data related to the federal government's COVID-19 alert application. N, the impacts of COVID-19 on mental health. O, Canada's level of preparedness to respond to another pandemic. And P, the availability of personal protective equipment in Canada and a review of Canada's emergency stockpile of personal protective equipment between 2015 and present. Q, the government's contact tracing protocol, including options considered, technology, timelines, and resources. And R, the government's consideration of and decision not to invoke the Federal Emergencies Act. That the study begin no later than October 20th, 2020. That the committee table its findings in the House upon completion. That the government provide a response to these findings within 30 sitting days, and that the evidence and documentation received by the committee during its study of the Canadian response to the outbreak of the coronavirus commenced during the first session of the 43rd Parliament be taken into consideration by the committee in the current study. Also, that in order to fully study this emergency situation and conduct this study, A, an order of the committee do issue for all memoranda, emails, documents, notes, or other records from the Prime Minister's Office, the Privy Council Office, the Office of the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, Office of the Minister of Health, Health Canada, and the Public Health Agency of Canada concerning options, plans, and preparedness for the Global Public Health Integration Network since January 1st, 2018, provided that these documents organized by department shall be provided to the clerk of the committee within 30 days of the adoption of this motion. B, an order of the committee do issue for a record of all communications between the government and the World Health Organization in respect of the options, plans, or preparation for any future operation or absence thereof of the Global Public Health Integration Network since January 1st, 2018, provided that these documents organized by department shall be provided to the clerk of the committee within 30 days of the adoption of this motion. C, an order of the committee do issue for all memoranda, emails, documents, notes, and other records from the Prime Minister's Office, the Privy Council Office, the Office of the Minister of Public Services and Procurement, the Offices of the Minister of Health, Health Canada, and the Public Health Agency of Canada concerning plans, preparations, approvals, and purchasing of testing products, including tests, reagents, swabs, laboratory equipment, and other material related to test and testing applications used in the diagnosis of COVID-19 since March 19th, 2020, provided that these documents organized by department shall be provided to the clerk of the committee within 30 days of the adoption of this motion. D, an order of the committee do issue for all memoranda, emails, documents, notes, and other records from the Prime Minister's Office, the Privy Council Office, the Office of the Minister of Public Service and Procurement, the Office of the Minister of Health, Health Canada, and the Public Health Agency of Canada concerning plans, preparation, and purchasing of personal protective equipment, including gowns, gloves, masks, respirators, visors, and face shields since March 19th, 2020, provided that these documents, organized by department, shall be provided to the clerk of the committee within 30 days of the adoption of this motion. E, an order of the committee do issue for all memoranda, emails, documents, notes, and other records, inclusive of correspondence with contracting firms and companies from the Prime Minister's Office, the Privy Council Office, the Office of the Minister of Public Services and Procurement, and the Office of the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry concerning plans, preparation, Article 1.3 designations, and purchasing of DEP ventilators since March 19th, 2020, provided that these documents, organized by department, shall be provided to the clerk of the committee within 30 days of the adoption of this motion. And F, that to protect against the premature disclosure of national security matters or personal privacy information contained in the documents provided to the clerk prior to the release of the documents by the clerk of the committee, any potential redactions be undertaken by the Office of the Law Clerk and Parliamentary Counsel, provided that the process for redactions begin the day after the documents have been provided to the clerk of the committee and shall last no longer than 7 days unless granted an extension by unanimous vote of the committee, and I, the redactions be limited to the protection of national security matters or personal privacy information to the exclusion of all other reasons, and 2, that in the event of a request for an extension, the request be accompanied by the release of all documents for which redactions have already been completed, and 3, that in the event of multiple requests for extension, all documents for which redactions have been completed since the last request for an extension must accompany an additional request for extension, and 4, no request for an extension may exceed 7 days, and all extensions shall be granted only by the unanimous vote of members on the committee. G, 7 days after all the documents have been provided to the clerk of the committee or their deadlines for the production have elapsed, as the case may be, and the redaction process mentioned in subparagraph B2 has concluded, invite the Minister of Health, the Minister of Public Services and Procurement, the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, and the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, each to appear separately before the committee for at least 3 hours, provided that in respect of each of them who does not agree within 1 week of the adoption of this motion to accept this invitation for the length of time prescribed, the chair shall be instructed to report to the House forthwith a recommendation that this committee be empowered to order his or her appearance from time to time. Mr. Chair, members of the committee should have received the full text of this motion in both official languages, as well as yourself and the clerk. I realize that this is a lot. However, this committee has been non-active for some time, and we are in one of the greatest public health challenges that our country has ever faced. Many of the documents that I'm proposing that the committee compel have been discussed in this committee before, and their coming to light has been delayed by prorogation. I think it is very important right now for our committee to get back to work and to be doing our job regardless. None of us have government appointments outside of Mr. Fisher, so our job is to hold the government to account across party lines to make sure that the government is serving the best interests of Canadian with the best possible response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I certainly urge members of the committee to support this motion. It will allow us to get to work right away. Also, we should not delay the compulsion of these documents. We will be going into a parliamentary recess over the next week after being prorogued for some time. The adoption of this motion today will allow folks that are involved in pulling those documents that should have been doing that already because of the session in the previous parliament to finish that work in an expedient manner and for us to start reviewing that information as quickly as possible. If there are arguments made today that there's not enough time to review this, there's really nothing new here. These are all things that have been brought up in question period, have been brought up in previous sessions of this committee, but we're now in a second wave, and the results of the government's response are showing with an increase in cases as well as another economic shutdown in parts of the country, and that's concerning. So I would like to adopt this motion today. I have endeavored to include my colleague's component on mental health. I do think that's important, but it has to be considered within this broader context. So I would like us to get to work, and I would like all members of this committee to really think about this in terms of their obligation as individual members of Parliament, not as one political affiliation or another who might be leaned on by the center of their party. We need this done. We need this done well. I will not accept any delay on this. I will not accept any argument that we somehow need to wait. You do have the motion in front of you, and I certainly hope we can proceed to adopting this.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Liu, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, the opportunity is not given to me. I had my hand raised in the Zoom and both physically, but opportunity is not given to me. I would like to bring my motion forward. My hand was up before Ms. Rampal Garner.
Point of order on that point of order, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Vecchio, or was that Ms. Vecchio? Anyway, thank you, Mr. Liu. I apologize. It was my error. However, I did give the floor to Ms. Rampal Garner, and I think that has to stand. But I do apologize. I'll have to make better, keep an eye on that panel a lot better than I have been.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Point of clarification, Mr. Chair. I would direct Ms. Sidhu's attentions to when the minutes of this meeting come out, that after you had recognized, I believe it was Mr. Van Bynen prior to the routine motions, that I said, since you were taking a speaking list, I would like to speak first, and you did recognize me for that. So in terms of proper procedure, you did put me second on the speaking list. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I speak? Mr. Chair, if you can check on the Zoom. Sure.
Ms. Rampal, I did give you the ability to respond to Mr. Van Bynen, and also I did recognize you later on to move your motion. My mistake. Ms. Sidhu, go ahead. You have further to say?
Mr. Chair, so I have right to present my motion if my hand raised in the Zoom before Ms. Rampal.
Unfortunately, I did give the floor to Ms. Rampal Garner, and that was my mistake. But I apologize. But it has, as far as Ms. Rampal Garner's motion, it's enormous. I think there are certainly aspects that are clearly within our mandate, but in terms of the whole motion, I don't think it's appropriate for me to rule on whether it's in order or not until I can see it and examine it in its entirety. So I would ask that this be deferred, this decision be deferred.
Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Rampal Garner, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, are you ruling this motion inadmissible?
I'm asking for time to analyze the motion and determine whether it is in fact in order.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I do not give you that time. It is on the floor and it is in order. Are you deeming it in order?
Mr. Chair, my point of order, and it goes to Ms. Sadhu's comment. If my memory serves correctly, and I think the record will show that you permitted Ms. Rempel-Gardner to respond to my motion, but you did not make a commitment to permit her to put forward a motion. And my thought is that if that in fact was the case, and the record will show that, then I believe Ms. Sadhu's motion should be before us before Ms. Rempel-Gardner's motion.
Responding to that point of order, Mr. Chair, Bosch and O'Brien actually does not support that particular analysis. You did give me the floor, and my motion is in order, and it's on the floor right now. And I believe that we should be debating my motion according to the rules.
We have,
I have right here.
Mr. Chair, can we ask clerk to, if I raise my hand on the Zoom, and I think I have right to present this motion. This motion is very important for me too.
I believe that the problem is my mistake. I did give Ms. Rempel-Gardner the floor, where I should have given it to you, but that was my mistake. But yeah, she did have the floor. I see Mr. So I'm gonna focus on the participants panel and whose hands are up there. So Mr. Kellaway, your hand is up.
Okay. One of the things I was going to say, Mr. Chair, is maybe refer to the clerk for his thoughts on this as well. Appreciate Ms. Rempel's motion on the table here, but for me, I do need to be able to go through line by line anything that I'm going to vote on for my constituents, for the constituents of Canada, to ensure that what I'm voting on, I'm aware of what I'm voting on, and every syllable needs to be reviewed by me. So I would ask for that to be deferred, but I will defer to you and to the clerk and for others in this debate.
Thank you, Mr. Kellaway. Ms. Sadhu, I see your hand is up on the participants channel.
Mr. Chair, can you examine the rules, digital rules? Can you ask clerk? This motion is very important to me. I really want to present this motion.
Thank you, Ms. Sadhu. I wonder if the clerk would like to comment here.
Yes, so well, the chair has recognized Mrs. Rempel-Gardner, so can we just have a little chat on the Mr. Chair by phone, just to make sure that can we suspend like 2 minutes?
This point of order, Mr. Chair, I don't believe the clerk can ask to suspend the meeting. Well, only you can do that.
Well, I'm asking
but I'd like to talk to the clerk anyway and find out what the straight scoop is on this. So I will suspend the meeting for a couple minutes. So thank you. I haven't actually seen this motion in writing. It was sent very, very shortly ago. I don't think it's reasonable for me to rule on this order without fully being able to analyze it. And I think it's very difficult for all of our members on both sides of the House to consider this motion. It's a massive, huge motion, and I think it deserves a proper evaluation and analysis. So again, I would like to defer that decision until I have a chance to examine the motion.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. There is no actual way for you to do that.
That being the case,
you can ask, but I mean, we have been prorogued for a long period of time. We can take as long as we need today for members to read it while we're sitting here. We've got time scheduled. We've got a full other hour. I know I read a lot more in a lot short period of time than that, but the motion is in order and it is on the floor and people can debate it now if they'd like, but it is in order and we should be moving to debate.
Well, whether it's in order or not is actually a decision of the chair. However,
point of clarification, Mr. Chair, is the motion are you ruling the motion in order or out of order?
I'd prefer not to rule on it at this time because I haven't really had a chance to digest it, and nor have any members of the committee other than perhaps yourselves. However,
Mr. Chair,
go ahead, Mr. Kellaway.
I suppose it's a point of order. I think I'm going to make the motion that we adjourn for debate on this one. I think it's essential that we have time and not within an hour. It's not a game show. It's not a time limited
If
thing.
you wish to adjourn the debate, you need to move to adjourn the debate and say nothing afterwards. Do you wish to move to adjourn the debate?
Yes.
Do we have a motion to adjourn the debate on the floor?
Request for recorded vote.
Absolutely. Mr. Clerk, would you carry on?
Mr. Fisher. Mr. Fisher.
Yes to adjourn debate.
Mr. Kellaway.
Yes.
Ms. Pawlowski. Mr. Pawlowski.
Yes.
Ms. Sidhu.
Yes.
Mr. Van Bynen.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I believe that Mr. Kellaway moved this motion on a point of order, which he can't do. Can I just get the clerk?
You can't move a substantive motion on point of order. I'll ask.
Can I get a clarification from the clerk on what happened there?
Please go ahead. Actually, I didn't recognize him on a point of order, but he did say a point of order when he spoke. But he was not recognized on a point of order. I'm gonna say that despite him saying he was bringing a point of order, he wasn't recognized as such. So I think we'll carry on with the vote. So carry on, Mr. Clerk.
So, Mr. Van Bynen, you said yes. Sorry. Mrs. Vecchio.
Vecchio is muted.
No, sorry. No to adjournment.
Mr. Chair, I don't believe that I was heard. I was muted, but I'm voting against it.
So voting what?
I'm sorry. This is the adjourning debate.
To adjourn the debate. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. No, I'm voting in favor of adjourning debate. Sorry, a much shorter motion was adjourned than this motion.
So, Mr. D'Entremont.
Not true.
No.
Mr. McGuire.
Yes, I vote for
No.
moving this forward. No, we're not. Yeah.
How are you voting, Larry? Are you voting to adjourn debate or not to adjourn debate?
No, I don't want to adjourn debate.
Ms. Rempel Garner.
No, I do not vote to adjourn debate on this motion.
Monsieur Thériault.
Je suis contre.
Donc non. Mr. Davies.
No.
5 yeas, 6 nays.
So the motion to adjourn the debate is not adopted. So we will carry on. So I'm going to rule the motion out of order at this time.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair.
Let me finish.
Mr. Chair.
Please.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Rempel-Garner, I'm still speaking. So I'm going to rule the motion out of order at this time, pending the opportunity to review it
Mr. Chair.
and analyze it. And
It's right there.
go ahead, Ms. Rempel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I challenge your ruling.
Thank you. So, Mr. Clerk, the motion is to sustain the ruling of the chair.
Can we have a recorded vote, please?
Yes.
Mr. Fisher,
Agree with the chair.
Mr. Calloway,
Agree with the chair.
Mr. Pawlowski,
I agree with the chair.
Ms. Sidhu,
Agree with the chair.
Mr. Van Bynen,
I agree with the chair.
Mrs. Vecchio,
I do not agree with the chair.
Mr. D'Entremont,
I do not agree with the chair.
Mr. McGuire,
I do not agree with the chair.
Ms. Rempel Garner,
I do not agree with the chair.
Monsieur Thériault.
Contre.
Donc, vous, OK, donc, oui ou non, non, c'est non.
C'est non.
Non. OK, OK. Mr. Davies,
I don't agree with the chair.
5 yeas, 6 nays.
So the ruling of the chair is not sustained. Therefore, it would apparently be in order. Mr. Davies, go ahead.
Well, thank you. So I would like to speak to the motion, and if I might just say that in terms of the previous things, I have my 12 years of Parliament, I've never heard anybody raise a point of order that someone else was recognized before them. You know, we're going to have some stable rules and respect for the process on this committee. But when the chair recognizes someone, they have the floor, and we can't be complaining after the fact that we should have been recognized. Second of all, you know, I'm very glad that the committee saw fit to overrule your attempt to declare a motion out of order that's been validly moved. You know, we may not like the motions before us, but that's not a reason to prevent us from discussing it. We are in our first committee. We're discussing committee business, and it is wholly in order for any member of this committee to put forward any motion they want, short, long, simple, complex, as they see fit. And complexity is not a reason for ruling a motion out of order. Now, to the motion itself, to be honest, I'm surprised that anybody on this committee, particularly Liberals who sat through with me, you know, 8 months, really, 7 months of study on COVID, would find anything complex or challenging about this motion. Really, what this motion does is it does a couple of very important things. Is it adopts all of the evidence that we heard from the previous session. And second, it continues the extremely important work this committee has to look at the COVID-19 issue on a holistic basis. There is nothing surprising, there is nothing complex, there is nothing disturbing, and there is nothing that should be controversial about this. I want to say that, you know, as my colleague Michelle Rempel said, Garner said, we are facing the biggest public health crisis in a century. And while I totally respect the motion that was raised by Mr. Van Bynen to segregate this committee's attention on mental health, as vitally important as that is not the only issue facing this country at this point in time. We are in the middle of a second wave. In fact, some might argue that we're in a continuation and deepening of the first wave. Our two largest provinces in this country, Ontario and Quebec, are on red alert. We have 1,000 cases of COVID that occurred in Quebec, and I think we're approaching that in Ontario as we speak. We're approaching the same level of heightened pandemic as we were experiencing back in March or April. Now, HESA, of course, has, I think, a critical role to play in this. It's our job to evaluate the effectiveness of the federal government's response, and first and foremost, fundamentally, to protect Canadians. That is what we're doing here across party lines, and I believe all of us have share that same goal. And it's about not only holding the government accountable, but for the larger purpose of making sure that we can produce information that will allow the government to provide the best possible healthcare, safety, and protection of Canadians. Now, last session, of course, all of us were dealing with COVID-19 on the fly. When this committee was meeting in March and April, this was unprecedented. We had no real context. We had no real experience. I remember back in March, the Health Minister of Canada saying that the risks of COVID-19 were low. I remember the Chief Medical Officer, or Public Health Officer of Canada, telling us that not only were masks not helpful, they were harmful. Of course, and we had I remember the Dr. Theresa Tam telling this committee that there was no real evidence of community transmission or asymptomatic transmission. Now, these are all arguably somewhat forgivable errors back in March or April. It's now October. We have a lot of context here, and we are facing a deepening of this crisis that, if you listen to public health officers across this country, are warning us could get disastrous. So I think it's incumbent on this committee to have a broad study, and I think that the itemization, which, by the way, I would point out, is not exclusive, it is inclusive. The motion that's before us lists a number of things that I think are critically important for this committee to be studying. Things like vaccine development. If there is one thing that Canadians are waiting for to get our economy back on track and to get public health taken care of, it's to develop a vaccine as soon as possible and get that distributed. We need to be delving into this to find out where we're at with this. And this can't be done by a task force in secret. We need, all Canadians, this committee has a right to ferret out full information on this, because it's the #1 public health concern of every Canadian in this country. The early warning system, the GIFIN, I want to know why this was canceled. I want to look into this, not necessarily to hold people accountable only, although that's very critical, but also because is this network back in operation? If not, why not? Who made the decisions? The adequacy of health transfer payments, which I know has been a very, very important priority to my Bloc colleague, is critically important, to look at whether our provincial and territorial governments have the resources they need. Our level of preparedness for the next level of pandemic. We know, let's face it, this government and previous governments were caught with their pants down in preparing this country for a pandemic. We did not have sufficient PPEs in this country. So as we stand on the verge of perhaps a second wave or a deepened wave, surely every person on this committee should want to do everything we can to find out how prepared we are today. These are the kinds of matters that are covered by this motion. And it's one of the reasons why, as much as Mr. Van Bynen's motion is absolutely something that should be looked into, and I note that this motion does look at the very important part of mental health, that for us to limit ourselves just to mental health issues in light of all the rest of what I said would be, I think, flagrant irresponsibility and dereliction of duty of this committee. I want to conclude just by saying one thing about redaction. Prime Minister Trudeau famously said that his government would be open by default. He pledged that this government would be transparent. When this committee asked for documentation provided before, and we limited the criteria of redaction in our motion, that was ignored by this government. And the ministry redacted information on 15 grounds, the grounds listed in the Access to Information Act, not the criteria that we specifically limited them to in our motion. In my opinion, that was contempt of Parliament, and it's not going to happen again. This motion here limits, it requires production of documents to this committee, limited only to redaction for national security concerns and personal privacy concerns. And that's as it should be. Because in order for this committee to do our job, we have the right and the ability, in order to have the documentation information before us unvarnished, so that we can see on behalf of Canadians and do our job that they elected us to do. These committees are not nuisances to government. These committees aren't inconveniences to be managed by the government. We play a critical role in the parliamentary process. And part of that is to act as a as a set of second eyes and a set of information, and to a wise government, a source of helpful information. And we can't do that job if the government is censoring information that comes before this committee. And so I want to put down a marker right now that if this motion is passed, that information that comes to this committee better not be redacted beyond the information specified in this motion, or that will be a clear and premeditated contempt of this committee. And you know, I would also say that every member of this committee has an independent obligation in order to get the information that we need to do our job. And I can't imagine anybody, even on the government side, unless they're just doing the bidding of the government, who would want to limit the information that this committee can see. So for all those reasons, I very much support this motion. I want to continue this committee's very, very critical work to examine the most important public health issue in this country. Listen, there's 1,000 issues in public health, and there's many, many that are extremely important. We all know what they are. Everyone on this committee has got priorities, but surely we can all agree that standing above all of them right now is a global pandemic that is crippling our economy and is killing our senior citizens in long-term care homes and threatens the health of Canadians from coast to coast. So I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of this motion. Once again, there's nothing complex about this motion. Of course it is in order. And we should all be, I would hope, unanimous in getting back to the business of putting the health of Canadians before partisan interests and getting the study underway as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. We go now to Mr. Kellaway.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Davies, for your comments. Again, most of everything that's been said today has a profound impact on Canadians. It is a pandemic that has ravaged individuals, communities, sectors. It has touched mostly every facet, if not all facets of life. When I think about voting on a motion, again, I looked at the email that I received. I think I received the motion here at 2:52 p.m. It's now Atlantic Standard Time. It's now 3:18. It's absolutely serious to every parliamentarian. For someone to own that or say that perhaps it's less of importance to a particular group or party, we're all in this together. And what I'm suggesting is taking just a little time to be able to actually read what's been presented. Yes, our committee was one of the few committees that met during COVID. We interviewed copious amounts of witnesses, important witnesses, people that are impacted by this pandemic, people that are on the ground servicing the needs of people that are impacted by this. And I think if we have just a little time to be able to review, to do the due diligence that's important to do as parliamentarians, I think we'll do the people of Canada a great service. And that's all I'm asking for, is ability to take a look at this and give it thoughtful reading. I think that's what the Canadians expect, and I don't think they expect anything less of us.
Thank you, Mr. Kellaway. Monsieur Thériault, allez-y.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before talking about the motion, I would like to underline that we're going to have to organize ourselves to better manage hands raised on the screen. I raised my hand several times, and when I did, there were not too many other people who were raising their hands. I don't want to wait forever until you recognize me, but you're going to have to better manage the way you look at the screen, Mr. Chairman, because I was turning on and turning off the hand on the screen because I didn't have the translation anymore.
and I don't want to have to live through this in the next few months. When there is a translation problem, we have to stop. You have to be told, and we have to stop the meeting. This is out of respect for the interpreters and out of respect for the Francophone I am. This being said, it was lucky I had received the motion. And I'm not going to be too long about this because most of what Mr. Davis said, I agree with. What I like about this motion is that we have been, we had worked for 5 months, and we don't want to throw this away. The government decided, and that was its decision, to prorogue Parliament. That was the government's decision, but it doesn't mean that we're going to just give up all that we had done during these 5 months. So I think that with this motion, we're going to continue with what we had been doing before prorogation. And it gives us a holistic vision of the issue. When we started working on this 5 months ago, the issues were different every week. Now we have a work plan that is quite strong. My first reaction was that this was solid. We're giving ourselves a lot of things to do, but Canadians deserve it. And that was the merit I could see to this motion because it covers all the different issues. And I'm going to stop here. That's why I'm going to support the motion.
The clerk advises me.
Thank you, Mr. Thériault.
Sorry, I'd quickly put down my hand, but I just want to say I recognize that we may go a little bit longer than the 3 o'clock. So I just want to make sure that we recognize that we will not be suspending or adjourning at 3. And I know that on anything like that we'll just continue to this discussion. I know that many people seem to have reasons why they would not support this motion, but I would ask as a member of Ontario where we're seeing this horrible thing.
Excuse me, Ms. Vecchio. We have a problem with translation.
Okay. I will stop. I will stop, but thank you.
Mr. Thériault, are you getting translation now?
I have no headset. It's
la
my
problématique
fault.
de la traduction serait liée au fait que Madame Vecchio n'a pas de micro.
If there was a problem, it's because Madame Vecchio didn't have a headset, so the translators cannot translate. I am sorry, Mrs. Vecchio, but I don't think I can continue like this. I feel very marginalized.
Thank you, interpreter, and thank you, Ms. Vecchio. So, Monsieur Thériault, I just advised that Ms. Vecchio was advising that we can go past the top of the hour and doesn't want to suspend or adjourn at that time. And now we go to, I believe, according to the clerk, Ms. Rempel-Garner is next. Please go ahead.
I have no further comment at this time.
Okay, so going back to the participants panel, I see Mr. Pawlowski, or Dr. Pawlowski, sorry, is next.
Yeah, you keep getting that wrong, Ron. So, yeah, it's looking kind of bleak for the Liberals here. This seems to be decided upon, but it may surprise those in the opposition to know that I don't actually have a lot of disagreement with a lot of what any of you have said. I absolutely agree that COVID-19 is the number one issue facing Canadians right now. There is a priority. I do, in fact, like what Ms. Rempel-Garner said about let's get working on this. As a longtime emergency room doctor, I in my life, when we say you have to do something right away, it means like within seconds or within minutes. It doesn't say there's no weeks or months to answering questions. So given the importance of this crisis, then I do agree we have to start looking at it. And as for the motion itself, and there was a very long list of things that we ought to be looking at, which I think was pretty comprehensive in that it dealt with pretty well all of the problems related to COVID. So on all those things, I agree. However, I do have some disagreement, and one is that you've provided a great big long list of things that I don't think, and I don't know if you had a Z in all other matters related to COVID not included in this list, because I don't know if that's a comprehensive list. So one, to accept that motion means we've accepted this comprehensive list, and I'm not sure that list isn't comprehensive. I think there are other things which could be included on that list, and as time goes by, this is an evolving situation. As time goes by, there may be other things that we didn't really think about which become more priorities. For example, I don't know if on that list was concern about COVID-19 getting into isolated Indigenous communities. That's certainly been a big concern. Influenza was really devastating in those communities, but I don't know if that's on that list. So for us to vote and say, yes, okay, we're going to vote to this, well, what about that? It wasn't on the list, so we're not going to do it. That doesn't make sense to me. Secondly, there's no prioritization, and I totally 100% agree we stay on COVID. This is our number one problem in Canada. It's our number two problem in Canada. It's our number three problem in Canada. And I do believe, with many of those who've spoken, that I do believe that the Health Committee can serve a constructive role in addressing this problem and being a forum to bring up many ideas that we have to look at. But we have to, I think, prioritize which things in COVID we're going to look at. In this list, in setting the agenda, has no prioritization in what we're going to do. So those are a couple of substantive issues I have with it. I think previously, under the previous session, I think we worked pretty well, actually, collectively together. I think we decided together what things we wanted to study. We called witnesses together, and I think we, in a way, I think we actually did rise above petty politics in dealing with this issue, and that's what we should continue to do. But I don't know. I mean, this seems to me a bit like petty politics in that we've allowed one party, the Conservative Party, to set the agenda, set the table, and then we all kind of follow suit. And included in that, you throw in the request for procurement of a bunch of documents with no redactions. And maybe that was a very long, and maybe I'm just a stupid doctor and not quite as complex as you people, but that was a very long motion, and by the end of it, I can't say I was falling asleep. I was starting to lose track of all the things that were in this motion. So I'm not sure the actual what was said about redactions, but obviously this is a big issue. I think almost everybody agrees that there probably ought to be some redactions, for example, personal privacy issues. If there are things in documents related to individual names, I think we can probably all agree that we don't want that kind of information coming out. There might be things with national security, but you've thrown it all together in an omnibus kind of bill, which there's a lot of good stuff in there. Yes, you've outlined a lot of the important measures related to COVID, but you've thrown in these other things which are problematic in it. I don't think the redaction issue is really nice and clear, and that we can come to an easy agreement with it. I think we ought to collectively decide, yes, we're going to deal with COVID, but what issues do we want to pursue with respect to COVID? What meetings we want to have, and then take the procurement of document issue as being a different thing rather than addressing it all together in one omnibus motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pawlowski. I believe we go now to Mr. D'Entremont. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. And if I just a little point of order before I get going is there's a number of hands that are up, and I know some have spoken, some haven't. So I just want to know if is it going to be the clerk or the IT folks that will be taking their name off of the list, or should we as members take our names off the list once we've spoken?
That's a good question. I actually have a conversation going with the clerk about that very matter. I'm hoping that we can focus on the participants panel and the hands raised there to kind of manage our speaking list. If you've spoken and your hand does not go away from the speakers list, please take it off. But I believe that it should be up to the administration, the staff to probably do that. And I'm getting the thumbs up from the Mr. Clerk on that basis. So anyway, please go ahead. Did you have?
All right, perfect. I just wanted to sort of not necessarily rebut, but to support the motion in the way it is. I mean, I've had the opportunity in the time that Mr. Davies was speaking, Mr. Pawlowski was speaking, Dr. Pawlowski, sorry. I've been able to read it a couple of times, and even to the point that Mr. Pawlowski was talking about when it came to disclosure of personal privacy. Section F clearly lays that piece out within the motion that we have before us. There's a reason why some of this is here, and for me as a new member of this committee, I've been paying attention to what the committee had been doing previously, and I think it's a very good way to take the information that should have already been compiled in the previous run of the health committee to be able to bring that stuff forward for our consideration as we start to look at the number one issue in Canada today, which is COVID, and which part of COVID do we want to focus in on. I think all of them are as important as each other, and I think this motion is able to sort of prioritize in a little way, but to understand that this is a very complex situation, health situation that is before us. There should be nothing here that is a surprise to the previous members of this committee, or even to the new members as well. Here's the part that upsets me a little bit as we bring these things forward, is that we continually, the Prime Minister uses it and other members of cabinet use it, that we're all part of Team Canada and we should be working together on things that are important to Canadians. And I agree with that issue. I do agree with that issue, that we should all be part of Team Canada to make sure that our constituents are getting the services that they require to get over this issue. But I can tell you, as an opposition member, I do not feel like I'm a part of Team Canada. It's Team Liberal. It's not Team Canada. I ask information. We try to get we try to get stuff shared with us all the time, and we continue we hit the blocks, we hit the issues, and we're not getting what we need. And I think this motion tries to put some of those things back on track so that we understand where the government is, where it's been, and where it is going, so that we can all continue to be part of this so-called Team Canada. Quickly, the last point that I wanted to make is that I know Mr. Van Bynen wanted to bring the issue of mental health forward, and one that I think we all think that is very important. And of course, that is included in this motion to look at the effects of mental health due to COVID-19. So, there's already some appreciation of what everyone within this committee is looking for. Those are my quick comments for today.
Thank you, Mr. D'Entremont. Did I say that reasonably correctly?
You got it right on. D'Entremont, use the best French word you can use there.
Thank you. We go now to Mr. Fisher. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And, hello from self-isolation, Nova Scotia, in a friend's basement, where I have my Surface Pro, which is where I read my email, and I'm on Zoom on my Surface Pro. I've not read this motion. This is, I think Mr. Dr. Pawlowski called it an omnibus motion. There's a lot in there, guys. There's a lot in there. And I think that, I do think it would be reasonable, and we talk about transparency. I do believe that we should be able to take a look at this. I have not seen this in print. I've tried to take a quick glance at it when we took take my eyes off the screen for a minute. But Mr. Chair, like, I just think that this is something that, as Mr. Callaway said earlier, he wants to break it down and read this and see exactly what this, maybe there's amendments to be, maybe this is something that this committee supports with amendments. Maybe this is I can't even think of an amendment right now because I haven't seen this motion in print. I would love to take Thanksgiving weekend, which, by the way, I won't be with my family for Thanksgiving weekend because of isolation. I would love to drill down on this and see what's in there. I do have some concerns with regards to Mr. Theriault as well. I'm not sure what he got, but this comes in at 2:52, and here we are at I'm Nova Scotia time. Chris and I are the only ones on that time, or no, Mike as well. But again, if this was a short little motion and we got it at 2:52, I think that would be fairly reasonable to have a conversation about it, and then you could look at it. You could decide whether there are things you'd like to suggest amendments on. This is too big even to look at to suggest amendments on a Friday afternoon before a long weekend, when I would have to basically shut off my Zoom screen in order to scroll through this omnibus motion. So, maybe, and I'm looking at all your pictures here, but maybe no one else minds the fact that they got this motion, and I'm assuming that everybody got it at the same time. I mean, I know Don Davies is a speed reader, but my gosh, he had a real good handle on this motion. And I got to tell you, I just don't feel like I have a handle on that motion. So I would seek that transparency that we talk about and that level of reasonableness, and give us a chance to look at this and maybe propose amendments. And maybe this is something that, next time we meet, we could sit down and we could come up with something that works for everybody. But that's just my thoughts on something that's really, really fulsome, a very fulsome motion. Mr. Chair, I would love to have the weekend to take a look at this.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. We go now to Ms. Sadu. Ms. Sadu, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree before what Mr. Davies was saying. We're Canada's worst health crisis. I have seen these impacts, including my own riding, where the CAF report on long-term care, including one home, which is falling in my riding. These issues are extremely important. We need to analyze these things properly. PROC had a similar long motion that came forward, and they agreed to take time to analyze it properly. As Mr. Fisher was saying, it's long. I know next 3 days, like, we have to analyze it properly before moving forward on it. All of us on this committee want to do good work for our constituents and for the country. We have to be reasonable and work together. I think it's reasonable to take some time to go through this very long motion. And Mr. Davis said 7 months we were working through COVID. We did a lot of good work. We heard many witnesses from many parts of the country. I would also like to speak on the importance of my friend Tony's motion, and so important. And limiting the discussion on COVID-19 by studying what he proposed and narrowing it on a part of the pandemic, that is affecting on many Canadians. The mental health impact of COVID-19 is real. It is here, and it's only worsening with the COVID-19. It's more explored. I met my youth council yesterday, but they're telling me horrible stories. So that is why it's so important, as well as the part in the country, people are being told to stay home once again. I'm from Peel, and the case is rising. We need to prioritize issues. In May, I met with the Canadian Mental Health Association, CEO Margaret Eaton, who also come to HESA, members know that. In our mental health related COVID-19 meeting, she phrased, we are experiencing two pandemics. The first is obviously COVID-19. The second is mental health impacts of it. She also said we are just at the tip of the iceberg in understanding the impact this pandemic is having on Canadians' mental health. CMHA did a study and found the Canadians are feeling more isolated than ever. According to CMHA, 47% people are feeling more alone than before. And Luke said before, we were looking at many issues under COVID-19. I think it is important to focus in on one area, then move forward on the next one. I appreciate that my other colleague said about the importance of being on Team Canada. I would agree. We must work together, and Canadians expect us to work together. Providing an extremely long motion during a meeting and not allowing for members to have time to review it is not exactly operating a team. I have had the time to properly assess the motion, which I don't. I want it. And it's so much that we need to reasonable and provide time to take a look into the all members. I think my other colleagues are agree with that. I ask how we're able to prioritize paramount points for the health of Canadians. I ask who decided on the issue of supporting province to long-term care or mental health is very, very important. In my writing, the case is rising, long-term care is issue, mental health is issue, and this is the time not to play politics, just to prioritize and focus on the health of Canadians. I sincerely believe that we are not prepared to properly study this issue. And we need time to, and let's prioritize one by one. I can say over 80% of all COVID-related deaths occurred in long-term homes. This issue is very close to my heart, and I know many colleagues are agree. And then I know one of the issue is this too. And then I think we need to prioritize one by one. It's extremely important for this committee to study how the federal government can work with the provincial and territory counterparts to ensure what happened in our long-term care, and the first wave never happened. What happened in the first wave, it don't happen in the when we are hitting the second wave. And this is very, very important. But it is more important than issue raised by all colleagues. And it's hard to decide, are we going to have another chance to do it? So I ask you all, why this rush? Let's set up a prioritize the issues. And I hope we will all understand this, and then properly we can study this issue more important to Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Liu. We go now to Mr. Davies. Mr. Davies, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, just a few things. I think a lot of excellent concerns were raised. I mean, Dr. Pawlowski raised some excellent concerns, and I'm happy that I think if he looks at the motion, he'll see that all of his concerns are actually completely taken care of in the motion. So, for instance, in terms of it being limited, the motion explicitly says that the study evaluate, review, and examine all issues relevant to the situation, including the following. So that was one of his concerns, was that he thought that the motion may be too restrictive. It's open to everything. Second, he raised a concern about the redaction, about concerns about national security or personal privacy. Both of those criteria are mentioned explicitly in the motion as being grounds for redaction. So that concern's taken care of. The third one was prioritization. He was concerned that there was no prioritization. Let's remember what we studied last session. What we were studying was the government's response to COVID. That was the topic that was given us. There was no prioritization in that either. And of course, if anything, this motion is far more prioritized than anything I've seen. But I think it remains open to us to make the priorities we want anyway. Nothing in this motion says that we have to study anything in any particular order. And I would say that once we adopt this motion, if it is the pleasure of the committee to do that, then we sit down and we do what we did last time. We break this down into themes, and we start getting witnesses together, and we start rolling up our sleeves, getting at it. So I don't see any problem with prioritization as well. In fact, when you go through these, the items that are listed as issues that we want to look at, it emerges pretty quickly, I think, which ones are maybe higher priority than others. I also just wanted to say that I don't see any petty politics here, and there's no ganging up on anybody. I mean, this motion, I think, has the support of the majority of people on this committee and the majority of parties. May not be the motion the Liberal Party wants to study. And might I remind you, Liberals came to this committee with a motion of their own. They wanted to study mental health, the impacts of COVID on mental health, which again is laudable. This motion just says that we want to study far more than that. And I just once again have to sort of gently but categorically reject any notion that this is complex. It's basically no more than just saying that this committee wants to continue studying COVID-19, and it just has listed a number of specific areas that we want to look at, which now in October of 2020, this committee is far better placed to identify. We couldn't do that back in February when we got the motion from the House. We didn't even know what to study. So it was just to study in everything in the government's response to COVID, which we did very well. So I think that was everything I wanted to mention. So I think that we should go ahead and adopt this, and then we can perhaps we can have at our next meeting decide to sort of prioritize these and start the process of witness selection and get to the job that Canadians want us to do, which I think all of us want to do here at this committee.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. Go now to Mr. Van Bynen. Mr. Van Bynen, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're hearing a lot of anecdotal evidence about the second pandemic and the increased risk that some people may have in terms of depression, psychological distress, substance abuse, and PTSD. And I very much appreciate my colleague, Mr. Davies' passion towards the urgency of the situation. One of my concerns is we're lacking focus on this. If we have too many priorities, we have no priorities, and there's a considerable amount of requests. And frankly, if we're talking about transparency, I think transparency is the obligation to give others the opportunity to read what is being proposed and an adequate amount of time to consider what's being proposed. And I don't think that's the case with this motion. I have not had an opportunity to go through it in detail. I think in the interest of transparency and openness, that we should all be given an opportunity to review it, find out what the implications are. With some of the documents that were being produced or requested to be produced, we had a considerable amount of discussion on that in committee previous to this. And we have had, as I've said earlier, 34 meetings, 171 witnesses, and 51 briefs, and we've yet to hear of what that has produced in terms of things that we should be considering on a go-forward basis. So we've invested a lot of time already, and we haven't heard what the recommendations were or the analysis as we go forward. The study that I proposed would provide us with a better understanding of the current situation relative to mental health and its impact on mental health. It would enable and provide us with a more informed strategy on mental health and on the well-being as we go forward. We've spent a considerable amount of money in terms of dealing with the early stages of mental health. I think that it's important for us to understand how effective those items are. And with the study, we would understand what the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic would be on mental health and the well-being of Canadians. I see nowhere in this motion where it says that we would want to take a look at high-risk groups like Indigenous peoples, racialized Canadians, and vulnerable populations. And I think it's important that we take a look at what the socioeconomic implications are that would require us to develop different programs. If we have a general, all-encompassing motion, such as what we have before us now, it takes away the opportunity for us to focus on areas that we need to put an early focus on. If I recall, in one of the witnesses that we heard, is if we focus on what's in the curve as opposed focusing on the curve itself, we might have had some better results. There's no mention of any of that in this motion, and so my concern is that as we go forward with such a broad mandate, we're losing the ability to focus on priority areas, and I think that's something that we need to give close consideration to. And when I say close consideration, please give us a week to read the document, to consider all the aspects of the documents, to look at the implications of the document. In terms of the document that I proposed, I had fully anticipated that if it needed to be referred, I was quite prepared to be transparent in that respect and permit others an opportunity to give full consideration to that document. That's not happening here. And it's a bit of a disappointment that the proposal with respect to what I consider to be the second pandemic, for which there is no vaccine, that it was so summarily dismissed, and now it's buried deep between 2 pages of small font documents, and I think that's totally unfair to people who are suffering at a very, very critical time. So I would ask that we be given the opportunity to review this in more detail. I know that we can go chapter and verse and rules and regulations, and that's fine. I think they're in place for a reason. But what I'm saying is let's respect everyone's desire to make a thorough decision, to do a thorough analysis, and to come forward with consensus, which I think can happen with more thorough discussion and with more thorough debate and an opportunity to review it. Again, if we have too many priorities, we have no priorities, and this is too much of a shotgun approach for me to be happy with it. But I'm willing to give it further consideration if people are willing to give me the opportunity to review it in more detail. And I know that there's a number of things that are reflected in this document that we had quite a robust discussion on, and we came to consensus. So why is it that we are rushing into this without providing the transparency of full due consideration? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Van Bynen. I'll go now to Dr. Pawlowski, please. I'll get that straight one of these days.
Yeah, you don't worry.
Sorry, I apologize. I skipped over Mr. Fisher. Mr. Fisher, please go ahead.
Okay, we could have gone with Dr. Pawlowski. And apologies to Mr. Van Bynen. I was trying my best to scan through this motion while he was speaking. So I'm just taking a quick look right now, and I see that the motion asks public health officials basically to stop what they're doing to protect Canadians and sift through emails and documents instead. And gosh, I got to tell you, these healthcare professionals, these public health officials are working hard day and night. And as has been said numerous times, we are in a resurgence where, some people call it a second wave. I call it a resurgence. You got these public health officials working with provinces, working with the province of Quebec and the province of Ontario to make sure that people are safe. And I would expect that some of these documents could also catch up a lot of correspondence with the provinces. In Ontario and Quebec, I think about the need to respect our relationship with the provinces and territories. Now, we hear Mr. Theriault in the House of Commons talking about that all the time, respecting that jurisdictional relationship. Again, public health officials are working day and night, especially since this resurgence has hit. I think it's, as I've said the previous time I spoke, I think it's very important for us to be transparent. And I know that it's very important to Canadians that they understand how officials are working to keep them safe. And I'm not suggesting that we wouldn't get to a place where we get that. I want to make sure that Canadians indeed have the access to accurate and reliable information from public health experts. And those public health experts deserve, at this point in the resurgent or the second wave, to focus on the work at hand. again, Ontario's in the second wave. Other provinces are seeing case spikes. Chris and I and Mike are fortunate to be wrapped in the loving arms of the Atlantic bubble. However, we're starting to see some cases creep up in Moncton now, in a long-term care facility. And I know that Sonia had intentions of moving a motion forward on long-term care. I believe I didn't see a motion, but looking again at this motion, it just seems like it's kind of all over the map. Our previous study on COVID kind of lacked a little bit of specificity. It actually was the opposite of this omnibus motion. It was, strictly speaking, to speak about every aspect of COVID. However, when Tony talked about his motion was specific in an area that, of all of the things that, of all of the witnesses that we had and all the testimony we had, we didn't get very much testimony on the mental health aspect of COVID-19, which I think, Tony, I was trying my best to listen to what you were saying, was you were calling it the pandemic within a pandemic or a second pandemic. And it's you know, there was an example of a crisis line in Nova Scotia that was receiving 25 calls a day pre-COVID and 750 calls during COVID, mental health line. So, you know, it certainly is something that needs to be done, and perhaps it's covered in this motion. Again, I haven't been able to drill down in this motion, so very likely there is a mental health aspect to this motion. But again, with my Surface Pro in front of me and my iPhone in my hand, I have not been able to drill down on this motion. So I'm perfectly in agreement that the committee must focus on COVID-19. I would have been very much in support of focusing on the mental health side. One of the focuses in my community and through our constituency office is mental health of my constituents, and we've held numerous town hall meetings in our riding, and they're all very, very well attended. And you know, what we've come to see pre-COVID is that we have a patchwork of mental health services across this country, and that is one of those things that, you know, we all in the House of Commons should be working on tackling. On how can we assist provinces and territories who have the jurisdiction for much of this stuff? How do we assist them? We don't want to trample on jurisdiction, but we want to be there to help in all things COVID. And if we truly want to be there to help in all things COVID, we have to be a willing partner with provinces and territories. We have to be a willing partner with Quebec and Ontario as it pertains to COVID, as it pertains to the mental health aspect, the pandemic within a pandemic. I think, Mr. Chair, again, I would seek the ability to drill down on this motion, which, you know, on continuous looks seems to have an awful lot of good stuff in it. I think that it's something that we as a committee could work on, much like we did in the last session. We worked really well as a committee on finding ways to come to an outcome, and very often we had unanimous support for folks' suggestions on studies and where to go, especially as it pertained to COVID. So, you know, again, Mr. Chair, I would seek the ability as a member of Parliament to be able to look at this over Thanksgiving weekend and drill down on this and perhaps come up with some suggestions for amendments down the road. But that is my plea for members in this committee is to give that opportunity over this weekend. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. We go now to Dr. Pulaski.
Yeah, I'm finally happy you got it right. Put me Dr. Fisher. This is, with all due respect to Don, I think this is a complex motion. For example, he rightly pointed out that in the preamble, it does say you're looking to examine all issues related to the situation, and that kind of detail is something that it takes time to fully appreciate and to read it again and say, well, is this an inclusive list? No, it's not an inclusive list. However, I would say, and this is in my mind, having spent a bit of time writing health legislation, I would have thought a consideration would be when you put a list, there is a kind of a supposition when you make a list that those are the priority issues. And okay, you can add other issues, but you've decided to delineate what you think the major issues are. And I think you've missed some. You've missed some of the big issues. For example, there's nothing here talking about the global response to this pandemic. And this is something that's affecting everyone in the world. I think it's certainly ethically becomes us to consider what's happening in other countries and our role as Canadians in addressing the difficulties faced by people in other countries. And just as in Canada, even more so in poor countries, it's the poorest people who are most often adversely affected. There's nothing in this list to suggest that at all is a concern of ours, nor is there any suggestion that perhaps we have to look at the global health response and look at the future of the global health response in order to prevent this happening again. There's something called the International Health Regulations, which gives World Health Organization the authority to issue recommendations in response to an outbreak of disease or public health emergency of international concern. These obviously need revising. There are things that could be done with those to perhaps make them more effective. So for one example there's been a proposal that in the international health regulations, WHO be given the power to be able to send independent observers into a country early on in order to determine whether or not there is something developing. That's not on your list either. Indigenous communities, this is a big concern that, as I said before, what happens if COVID gets into the Indigenous communities? Not on your list. The disruption of the medical health system and the harm to people because of COVID. People don't want to go to the hospital. People aren't going in when they have their heart attacks. We're not doing the investigations we need in order to detect and treat cancer. So this has been a pretty major theme and a pretty major concern. Not on your list. Schools and daycares, obviously a really big concern now in the last month that schools have restarted. Not on your list. So, but you chose to write a list here. These seem to be our priorities. But I would say, why don't we work collectively and decide what our priorities are, rather than you kind of dictating a list? Well, this is what we think the priorities. Well, I think you got some of those priorities wrong. Even when you talk about in the very first thing, you talk about testing. I have to look at the actual wording of the testing, because there again, I don't think you got it quite right. You say rapid at home testing approval and procurement process and schedule and protocol for distribution. You're not even looking at the kind of the science, the public health of testing, the rationale for testing, how much you can rely on a test. These are fundamental. That's what you do as a doctor. You decide when you do a test, what are you going to do with that test? And this is somewhat complex. It's the negative predictive value of a test, which is what you're looking at. And this takes time to explain. And when you talk about rapid testing, you have to consider the negative and positive predictive value, and that's complex. It depends on the incidence of the disease in the population. But you're just jumping right to the conclusion that we want to do rapid testing. Well, I think it's a little more complex than that. So I think without the Liberals, you've decided that these are going to be the things that we ought to be examining, and I don't think you quite got it right. So that's one thing, and there's certainly no attempt to prioritize what we're going to do, because heck, if we were to have one meeting on each of these things, I don't know if we even have time before Christmas to do all those things. And then the second thing, a big concern is the procurement of documents, and as Darren has said, certainly I think a consideration for all of us ought to be possible implications on our relationships with the province. Obviously, the province takes the lead in health issues. They have jurisdiction constitutionally for healthcare. A lot of our response to the pandemic has been in concert with the province. Having a good relationship with the province is absolutely fundamental. If you're asking for all emails and all communications, I would think almost inevitably there's going to be some things which could potentially harm our relationship with the province. And it would seem to me this may not be a really wise idea at this time when our relationship with the province are so important. Anyhow, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pulaski. We'll go now to Mr. Kellaway. Go ahead, Mr. Kellaway.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And just to be somewhat of a bookend to Dr. Pulaski or Mr. Pulaski, I'm wondering if there is an appetite to look at having the Liberal members of the committee take a little time to look at the motion. I don't know if this motion is good, bad, or indifferent, but I want to be a part of the solution. I want to be able to speak to it, and I can certainly shut off the mute and read and do that now. But I don't think any of the people that elected us across the country did so based on our ability to read quickly. It's to think about what we're reading and how we can add to it, how we can contribute to it. That's Team Canada. That's a Team Canada approach. So it is looking just for a specific amount of time to be able to do that, and not necessarily to tear it and rip it apart, but to add quality and contribution to it for the benefit of all Canadians from coast to coast to coast. So I'm wondering if that is something that could be discussed here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kellaway. We go now to Mr. Van Bynen. Go ahead, Mr. Van Bynen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Seniors' mental health is a highly relevant issue right now, and that's according to Dr. Ma, who is the Associate Professor of Psychiatry at the University of Toronto. And we know that he further says that we know that during SARS epidemic in 2003, there were increases of psychiatric problems among older adults in areas with large outbreaks of the virus. And today, 1/3 of the people below 65 years of age are experiencing depression and high stress. And even when they have not been infected or exposed to COVID-19. Now, these numbers may even be higher in older adults who are more vulnerable. And further, I'd offer the comments of the assistant professor at the University of Victoria. He says there are some unique features of COVID-19 pandemic. The virus ease of transmission compared to the others necessitates some regions and more broadly reaching public health responses, with certain regions and areas needing to take stronger measures. For example, lockdowns in cities, extensive businesses and school closures around the world, and the public health response. And I don't think that we're addressing the issues that are global, as was mentioned by Dr. Pulaski. Further, the Canadian Mental Health Association has said that the Canadian mental health has taken a severe hit during the pandemic, with the nation seeing exploding rates of anxiety and depression, increased use of alcohol and drugs, and the difficulty in assessing supports, according to a recent survey from Mental Health Canada. And that's as recent as April 2020. And more than half of the Canadians feel that the federal government and the provincial governments should be doing more to support mental health for Canadians. And I'm saying this, Mr. Chair, in addition to the United Nations, where it says good mental health is critical to the functioning of society at the best of times, and it must be front and center in every country's response to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. Mental health and well-being of whole societies have been severely impacted by this crisis and are a priority to be addressed urgently. Mr. Chair, when I see that it is one simple bullet point on two small point font recommendations, I believe that we're missing an opportunity. I know that we've seen an awful lot of finger wagging and accusations that we should have done more sooner when we got engaged, or when we responded to the pandemic that we are now in. And this is my point. We now have an opportunity to get ahead of what I refer to as the second pandemic. And it would be on us if we didn't take the appropriate steps to make sure that we acted when we could. And that's one of the reasons why I brought my own motion forward. Now is the time for us to focus on, firstly, containing the issue that we have. And in part, I think some of these recommendations will help us that. I'm not sure that the production of documents is a productive step forward, but we can work our way through that. But now is the time for us to be proactive and deal with what lies ahead of us. And what lies ahead of us in mental health is something that concerns me deeply. I've seen its effect on members in my community. And again, this is not a pandemic that we're going to be able to fix with a vaccine. This is something that requires very careful early thought, and to be one of such a number of broad statements, I think does injustice to people who are suffering from the mental health pandemic. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Van Bynen. Apparently I was on mute. Again, I still have to learn that lesson. We go now to Ms. Sadhu. Ms. Sadhu, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As my colleague said before, in this motion, what is in it? Yes, testing is important, and I didn't get a chance to read whole of this, but there's what is in it. That is why on the last statement I said we need to set our priorities. Mr. Fisher mentioned a very important point that public health officials will have to work to produce documents and address this motion while cases are rising in Quebec and Ontario. Let alone the fact that this weekend people will gather for Thanksgiving, and we are likely could see more cases rise. Today we have over 900 cases in Ontario, and Quebec cases have been over 1,000 a day. While now, and Ontario has seen far and away the largest case total today. In my riding, cases are also rising. This Thanksgiving weekend has the potential to be a super spreader weekend. That is what people saying. This is what our public health officials are concerned about. We must take time to properly analyze and then listen to health public officials. And this motion ensure that we are not overburdening public officials whose job is to keep our constituency safe. We need to be cognizant. There's a significant amount of personal information that needs to be protected. I need to add that operational details and action taken by other orders of government would also likely be caught up in this search. And it is important for them to be consulted beforehand as well. Materials that do not contain this information can be publicly shared as requested, but we need to be mindful of privacy issues as well. The hardworking public servants that are doing the critical work to helping Canadians and keeping people safe will be forced to redirect their efforts to filling these orders. Our teams and departments are in regular communication with the provinces and territories. They are wrapped up in all of our communications. This is the time to focus on Canadians' health. It is more important. Making some of these documental public at this time could put Canadian position at risk as we are trying to resolve the issues they point. And Mr. Chair, we need to shine on the light of discussion, hear from witnesses, do a proper study so that Canadians are not falling through the cracks. This is an urgent and important study, and somewhere we can make a real difference. Mr. Van Bynen's motion would ensure that we study that right away, and this is important, very, very important. I cannot express on more, like I know when I met with my youth council, my constituents, and the stakeholders. This pandemic is exposing how broken our mental health system already is and how much we need to focus on that. We must invest in community mental health programs and services, especially our isolated seniors. We need to improve on that. improve our nationwide suicide prevention plan. These are the very, very important topic, and long-term care, and there's many more. So that is why we need time to focus, to read this and prioritize the study. And what is in it, we need to bring that in too. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Du. We go again to Mr. Kellaway, please.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair, and a lot of good discussion here on all sides of the aisle. To go back to just the amount of time, I'm wondering again. I know next week is a constituency week, but if there was an opportunity to have the weekend to review, and again, I don't know the procedures for this, Mr. Chair or Clerk, but to be able to come back to have that fulsome discussion, have what is needed to move forward in whatever form or fashion. I'm wondering if that is that something that is open to the members opposite, and to give us the weekend to do so, and I guess is there a possibility then to form the meeting during the constituency week if possible, to be able to have that time to again simply digest what has been presented in the last half hour. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kellaway. Mr. Kellaway, we go now to Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just noticing that we also have a notice of motion from Mr. Barlow and a notice of motion from Mr. Theriault, and it's too small to read, but so we started this meeting by shutting down debate on Mr. Van Bynens. We didn't get a chance to hear the motion from Ms. Sidhu. I mean, I can't read this, it's too small, but this could be something that's very important. I don't know if other members have seen Mr. Theriault's motion.
Point of order. Can't start talking about other motions.
Is that in English and French, Mr. Chair?
Sorry, thank you for the point of order. It's Mr. Fisher's time. He can use it as he pleases.
Yeah, and thank you. I know the member is actually right on that. But what my thinking was here we are in our first meeting, and this is what we've traditionally done is we've had, whether it be a blue sky discussion or you call them business meetings, or we sit around and we talk as a committee about which motions are the ones we want to move forward on. And apologies for not being able to read this small print on my iPad, but maybe this motion of Mr. Theriault is extremely important to Mr. Theriault, and maybe it's very important to the rest of the committee. I don't know, but again, having the ability to, again, Mr. Chair, you call it a business meeting where you sit down and as a committee, you sit there and you say, okay, folks, what is the most important thing? What do we want to talk about? What motion, and how might we come to an agreement on a potential motion? Do we amend it? Do we take it holus bolus as is? There's been a lot of talk about the transparency of having a 2-page motion that one truly can't digest while sitting here listening to the comments of all of the other folks on the Zoom meeting. Man, I wish I could read this Mr. Theriault's motion here. Again, apologies for it being such small print, but that would be something. Again, I'd like to look at Mr. Barlow's and Mr. Theriault's motions as it relates, and Ms. Vecchio is right, but I mean as it relates to what we're deciding to do for our first meeting. I know that there was also, I believe, a motion at the end before a proroguing that was going to continue some of the things that we'd done, which was also going to potentially resurrect or save some of the things that we'd had in the past. That all options should be on the table. However, today all options are off the table because we won't get to Mr. Theriault's study. We won't get to Mr. Barlow's study, assuming that they are studies. We won't get to what I really truly feel is a very, very important study with Mr. Van Bynen, and we won't get to a very, very important study that means an awful lot to Member Sadu. So again, I would love to see us continue discussion on this motion the next time we meet, and have some time to digest it and talk about or think about ways it might be able to be amended so that maybe we can get to a point where everybody agrees. But you know, I really do believe that there's value in us having a blue sky or a conversation about what the priorities are and whose motion has the support of the committee, and very well might be Ms. Rempel-Garner's motion. It may very well be over the weekend we read Mr. Theriault's and think that Mr. Theriault's motion has merit and might be something worth looking at first. But again, we don't have that opportunity here with this discussion today. So again, I would say that this is something that deserves further drill down, a further dig down on the details, and I think that it would be something that would be certainly for this member very helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Monsieur Theriault, allez-y.
Oui, là, monsieur.
Mr. Chair, I don't know if it's a procedural issue, but I would like to understand what will be our future modus operandi. When the committee gives us a notice to meet, the session will be extended because Liberals don't agree with what's on the table, or will we respect the notion of meeting, the notice of meeting, sorry. We're in a hard situation. I work hard. I don't tabulate my hours of work, but I'm very organized. Everyone has their own agenda. Our time is so precious, precious for all. Now you went beyond 22 minutes. You said nothing. You didn't underline anything. I'm really disappointed of the way we're organizing our business today. For me, it's very clear. 3:30, I'm out of here. Oh, we can continue debating and tabling motions. I'm not worried concerning my motion. I know I'll have an opportunity today to table it again. I know it's important because the deadline is January 1st. Or we start from January 1st. Tell me how you want to work this out. I don't think it's going very well right now. If we have a notice of meeting from the clerk, we have to respect what's in that motion and that notice. Sorry. So I'm asking the question to you, Mr. Chair. How do you want to work? Do you think we'll go beyond the time each time the Liberals are in disagreement with us?
Up to the committee to decide whether to adjourn or not. We are not, the fact that it is proposed as a 2-hour meeting does not necessarily bind us. But we're, certainly the members have been arguing for some time. But if Monsieur Theriault, if you would like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting or the debate, that would be up to you. Did you wish to make such a motion, Monsieur Theriault?
What I want, Mr. Chair, is that you respect what's in a notice of meeting from the clerk's office. When it's over, that we've reached the time that is over, you can raise the issue and ask members if they want to extend the meeting. We didn't decide how long we would extend, for how long. I mean, I want to hear my colleagues, yes, but at some point in time, we have other things to attend to because we have busy agenda. That's what I wanted to hear from you. You're telling me I could ask for adjournment. I do understand that very well, but isn't it up to you to raise the issue when we go beyond the time that was planned for?
We have Ms. Vecchio's intervention, which says that they do not wish to stop right on the dot within our time slot. I don't have the power to arbitrarily adjourn the meeting. It is up to the committee. So the committee is, we can carry on in this debate as long as we wish to do so, or we can consider a motion of adjournment. So it's really up to the committee. So I'll go now to Ms. Sadhu. Ms. Sadhu, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I understand Mr. Torio's frustration. That is why when Darren said we need to more dig down. So I totally understand, but I would like to take a minute to stress the importance that it is reasonability of taking some time to reflect on this motion. I think that the opposition would agree that instead of rushing forward with the motion, it is important to take time to properly assess each and every aspect of this motion, because it's so important to Canadians. As my colleague said, Marcus, Dr. Marcus, what is in it, what is not in it. That is why we need time to dig down and then come up with collectively what is more important to Canadians. Let's discuss that, but need to dig down. Canadians deserve the best from this committee, especially during these challenging times. That doesn't mean rushing forward with the omnibus motion that we cannot, digest. And there's no time to read that. This is a huge motion that only briefing referenced the mental health impacts of COVID-19. Over 9,500 Canadians have tragically died due to COVID-19. And every day we are seeing case numbers rise as Canada enters in the second wave. But we need to shine a light on the discussion, hear from witnesses, do a proper study, and we can give the direction. So the Canadians are not falling through the cracks. As I said before, those, as my colleague Tony's motion, it's also very, very important. I said that earlier, why it's so important. As you know, twice as likely to say their mental health has declined in this challenging time, 5 times as likely to feel depressed, 3 times likely to have trouble coping, 4 times likely to have suicidal thoughts, 4 times likely to have tried to harm themselves. This motions also mention long-term care, which I was not get chance to present that. So that is why I wanted to, that motion, we study long-term care, which is very, very important in my writing. So that is why we have to go through, dig down, Mr. Chair, by agreeing to study the impact of COVID-19 on long-term care. Our committee can be the first step in righting the wrongs of all government that have ignored the issues of long-term care for far too long. The type of person who need long-term care assistance in changing our care and is not changing with it. 62% of residents have some form of Alzheimer's, and 90% of residents in Ontario have some form of cognitive impairment. As well, previously people were saying in these facilities 1 to 2 years, but now an average length to stay around 6 months. Mr. Chair, need of long-term care residents are changing. This is an important issue too. To summarize, these are important issues to say care. We must take the time to analyze the motion, ensure that so committee, we are using this time, the resources properly. We need time to dig down. And as my colleague said, what is not in this motion? We have to prioritize what is important to Canadians. This is not, I know we need time. I understand my friend Luke's frustration. That is why we need time to dig down. And I urge all members, we have to look into that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Sadu. We go now to Mr. Kellaway, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I move to adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Kellaway. So we have a motion to adjourn the meeting on the floor. I'll ask if it's the will of the committee to adjourn. Is there any dissent for that?
Recorded vote, please. Le vote devrait compter.
Seeing no indication, we will go to a recorded vote. So please go ahead with Mr. Clerk with the vote.
Mr. Fisher?
I agree to adjourn debate.
Mr. Colloway?
I agree to adjourn debate.
Mr. Pawlowski?
I agree to adjourn debate.
I'm sorry, may I clarify that this motion was not to adjourn the debate, it was just to adjourn the
meeting. Yeah.
I agree to adjourn the meeting.
Same vote, okay. Ms. Sidhu?
I agree to adjourn the meeting.
Mr. Van Buysen?
I agree to adjourn the meeting.
Ms. Vecchio? Your mic, you're muted. I can't hear a vote.
Perhaps you're asking for me?
Yes.
Contra, no, to adjourn the meeting.
Okay. Mr. D'Entremont?
No.
Mr. McGuire?
No.
Ms. Rempel Garner?
No.
Monsieur Thériault?
Oui.
Mr. Davies?
No.
Six yeas, 5 nays.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. So the meeting is therefore now adjourned. Thank you all.